I'm Kathy, the Celtic Mink, and this is Celtic Mink Comments. When I was a little girl, I was told science fiction books were for boys because long before geek culture became mainstream, there were fangirls quietly fighting to belong in spaces where they didn't want us. I've been a fangirl my entire life. Back when being a nerd wasn't fashionable, back before superhero movies dominated theaters, back before every company on earth discovered geek culture was profitable. Well, anyway, growing up as a girl who loved science fiction was a very different experience than it is now. By second grade, I was already reading children's science fiction books and adult short stories. I was one of those kids who constantly carried around a book. By fifth grade, I remember my school librarian trying to gently redirect me away from science fiction because apparently I was reading boys' books. The librarian wanted me reading romance novels, girls' books instead. I don't think she was trying to be cruel. That was just the culture at the time. There were books for boys, books for girls, interest for boys, interest for girls. Science fiction was very much considered a boy's space. Well, I loved it anyway. There's something funny about people trying to stop a determined reader from reading what they enjoy. It usually just makes them more committed. By high school, my youngest brother joked that I was trying to buy every science fiction book ever printed. He may not have been entirely wrong, but something important happened in high school too. I discovered other girls who read science fiction. Now, this was before social media, before fanish websites, before online communities. We discovered each other the old-fashioned way, by noticing what books somebody else was carrying. You'd see another girl walking through school with a science fiction novel and suddenly think, wait, you read sci-fi too? That mattered more than people realize. Because when you grow up feeling like the odd one out, finding other people like yourself reading the same books becomes incredibly validating. We'd exchange books, recommend authors, expand our little reading worlds together without spending extra money. Felt wonderful realizing you weren't alone. Then college came. During one of those student activities fairs with all the clubs and organizations, I had discovered something magical. The Science Fiction Club. I found my people. I have made friendships that have lasted to this day. But even then, women were still a minority in fanish spaces. Science fiction fandom had historically been overwhelmingly male. I already knew fandom existed because I read about it in the backs of science fiction magazines I bought growing up. You'd see convention ads, club information, fanish newsletters. Fanish culture back then was male dominated. Women existed in those spaces, but as exceptions, the assistants, the girlfriend, the wife. There was definitely a culture at the time that quietly communicated, no girls allowed. Now, to be fair, there absolutely were women deeply involved in science fiction fandom. Some were incredibly passionate fans, professional writers and artists, the readers, the convention organizers. But culturally, women were always treated as outsiders in many ways. And conventions especially had strange atmospheres sometimes. I didn't start attending conventions regularly until my early 30s because they were expensive. And nobody taught me the survival tricks. Things like gerbil fandom. Basically meant cramming as many fans into one hotel room as humanly possible to save money. Science fiction fans could survive conventions with the resourcefulness of raccoons. By the time I started attending regularly, some things still hadn't changed. Men still dominated the leadership roles. Women were expected to assist instead of lead. And conventions were still very much adult spaces back then. Some of that made sense because conventions sometimes involved heavy drinking, humor, and late night chaos. One thing science fiction fandom prided itself on was accepting socially awkward people, the nerd, the socially outsider. I think acceptance was genuinely important. But a lot of people found belonging in fanish spaces who didn't fit comfortably elsewhere. But unfortunately, sometimes that tolerance also created problems. As more women entered fandom, some men reacted badly to it, others took advantage. One convention experience still makes me laugh. I had one particularly persistent shadow following me around nonstop. Well, eventually, I resorted to losing him in a poker game. I joined a penty-ante poker game, then I dipped. I vanished like a science fiction ninja. Yes, I still laugh telling this story. The funniest part? I saw him at later conventions, but he never mentioned it. Thankfully, fandom has changed enormously over the years, mostly for the better. Not perfect, but there's always room. More women entered science fiction spaces, more diversity entered fandom. The unofficial statistics shifted closer to 50-50 from 70-30. Women were creators, organizers, writers, artists, leaders, and major voices within the fanish culture. One of my favorite changes, families. Now you'll see entire families attending conventions together. Parents, children, grandparents. 3 generations of fans sharing something they love. I've literally watched children grow up inside fanish spaces, including my own child. And years later, now his family is part of fandom too. That makes me so happy, because fandom should be about the imagination, creativity, community, the shared joy, not gatekeeping, not no girls allowed. Now, yes, there are still a few old school fanboys who resent how much fandom has changed. She encountered men angry that women still exist in their spaces. But fangirls help build fandom too. We've always been there, even when men pretended we weren't. And I genuinely hope fandom never goes backward, because losing women's voices, creativity, humor, storytelling, and perspective would make the science fiction world poorer, not stronger. Anyway, these are a few memories of growing up as a fangirl science fiction fandom before geek culture became mainstream. Love to hear from you. Are you in fandom? Do you ever feel excluded from a hobby or community because of gender or stereotypes? And if you're part of fandom now, how do you think things have changed over the years? Tell me your experiences. Let me know in the comments.